Good afternoon and good morning. Welcome to today's webinar, Keys to Successfully Migrating Off a Legacy TMS. My name is Sarah Pease, and I'm from Kyriba's marketing team. We're delighted to have you here today. As everyone is getting settled in, just a few housekeeping items. We do have a lengthy attendee list today, so I've placed everyone in a listen-only mode. We will be recording today's session, and I'll send you the shareable link via email after the webinar. Today's attendees of the full live session will be granted 1.2 CTP CCM and 1.2 FP&A credits, and we'll email out the confirmation letter for those within 3 to 5 business days, along with the slides and the recording, so you can share it with your colleagues. And finally, we have time set aside at the end of today's webinar for a live question and answer. So I do encourage each of you to submit your questions to the presenters throughout the webinar control panel in the session. It's my very great pleasure to introduce today's presenters. First is Kyriba's very own Tom Gavigan. Over the last 12 years, Tom has worked globally with banks, brokerages, trading firms, and corporations in the Treasury and risk management space. He's held roles across the financial technology development value chain, from software implementation to product and pre-sales management. Tom currently serves as the Director of Global Solutions Engineering here at Kyriba. And a very warm welcome to our other presenter today from Actualize Consulting is Alicia Kennedy. Alicia is a Senior Manager, Treasury and Capital Markets at Actualize, with 10 years of Treasury consulting experience to focus on designing and implementing technology solutions to solve complex business problems. She has led over 20 successful implementations of various Treasury management systems and holds the CFA designation. Welcome, Alicia. With that, let's go ahead and begin today's webinar with a quick audience poll. This is a live poll. We want to hear from you. Why are you considering switching a TMS? Go ahead and take a look on your screen now. Why are you considering switching your TMS? Go ahead and let us know on the screen by clicking one of the following. Our company has geographically outgrown our current system. We just don't use the technology and we have reverted back to spreadsheets. Our tech is no longer supported by internal IT or a third party, or our company's needs are more sophisticated than your current system. Which of those reasons is why you're considering switching a TMS? I see answers rolling in. To the quick poll question that we've got live on your screen now, why are you considering switching to switching your TMS? And leave the poll open for just a few more seconds to get everyone in. And let's go ahead and close that first live poll. That's the first of 2 live polls that we'll have during today's webinar. Looks like the vast majority of you, wow, 42%, are telling us that the reason why you're considering switching a TMS is that your company's needs are more sophisticated than your current system. In almost tied for second place is you just don't use the technology and you've reverted back to spreadsheets. In third place at 21%, our technology is no longer supported by internal IT or a third party. And in last place, our company has geographically outgrown the current system. So with that, let me turn it over to Tom Gavigan.
Thanks, Sarah. I appreciate that. Interesting results there. I'm not too surprised on the top end. But a little bit surprised on the bottom end. With that, it gives us a good kind of starting transition to the topics that we'll go through today, Alicia and I. What we're going to do is start and kind of dive a little bit deeper into, why consider a TMS transition? Why are we on the call here? And some of the things that you are considering, but there might be a couple of things that you might not have considered. From there, we'll go and transition to justifying that and understanding how do you get that internal approval to make that transition and to make that switch? What are the steps that you have to take there? Then kind of once that's been done, into the implementation, right? What's the methodology and some special considerations to think about in this situation where you already have a solution and you're looking to migrate into something new. And then lastly, we'll go into how to approach that transition. So this is kind of some key tactical things to consider as you're actually going through your implementation. So I'll start here on why consider a transition to a new TMS. And again, the poll results, I think, were pretty much in line with what I was expecting. But again, let's kind of highlight some of those areas. And what we see commonly as we, interacting in the role that I have here, we interact with a lot of companies around the world that are coming off of or using another or an existing solution today in some capacity. Some have homegrown applications. Some are using some decades-old technology that they're looking to come off of. Some are in, have built some things inside of their ERP and now need to kind of advance themselves into using a dedicated, focused treasury management solution. And really, when we think about it, the things to consider fall into two categories. There's functional things that we're looking at from a new solution, but then there's also non-functional things as well. Functionally, a couple of things that we'll hear is that the functionality that we're using today or experiencing today is stuck at the time of the implementation. That the system is lacking all of the needs that, or all of the capabilities that we need in order to kind of support the treasury and financial functions. A lot of times reporting is a key focus and that we're not getting the adequate reporting that we need. And then lastly, the other thing is from a connectivity perspective. Systems are only as good as the data that it's given. How much is that? How hard is that? Is it actually occurring? How hard is that to maintain and set up? From a non-functional perspective, when we're not just talking about what that technology can provide functionally, there's things to consider in terms of just overall support, internal reliance on IT, the cost actually of that, and that means hard dollar cost, but also things to consider are the opportunity cost there, and that the system hasn't really evolved. So really, let's break down the three key areas and talk about them a little bit more from a functional perspective. Starting on the reporting side, and again, this is coming from a lot of various discussions that I've had over the years where technology has been put in place inside of a treasury arm of the company, and you'll hear things that the reporting just isn't good enough. We can't get the reports that we need. It doesn't have all of the data we need. We might use the tool as basically a data repository, but we dump all of that data down and ultimately just do all of our reporting in Excel. A lot of things you'll hear are that our reporting is stale. And what we mean is that the reports probably were great in 2007 when we set up the system, but it's now 2019 and we need different things and have to look at things a bit differently. But we can't do it ourselves. We can't use that report writing tool. It's a unique tool. It might be a third-party application. And we don't have the internal expertise in order to do that. The individual who set that up is no longer at our company. The consultant who we worked with, we no longer have a relationship with, meaning we can't get in and actually use that report writer. Sometimes as you look at older technology, it just can't keep up with the demand of the data itself. We have too much data, it's slowing down the system, and really we can't take the action we need off the insights we're given from the solution. And then lastly, on the reporting side is advancement into business intelligence. In the treasury space, we have a lot of data at our fingertips, a lot of cash flow data, a lot of payment activity, a lot of supplier information. And with the tools that are now out there, we want to take advantage of them and leverage the capabilities given to us by business intelligence, but we simply just don't have that capability with the existing tool we have today. On to connectivity, as mentioned, Treasury solutions have been around for 3 decades or so, if not more, and they've historically always been these fancy reporting tools at the end of the day. And again, as I mentioned, the tools themselves are only as good as the data that they get. And from a Treasury perspective, one of the key things is the connections with our banks and getting all of that bank data we need inside of our application to gain the insights that we need to do what we have to on a Treasury space. So are we integrating with our banks? Is that tool that we're using actually able to integrate with our banks and able to integrate with all of our banks? A lot of times, maybe only some of our banks we have flowing into our system, but some of the other banks that we have maybe outside of the borders, we don't have connectivity to. So we're really only gaining partial insights and partial visibility. Not only that, if we do have connections, how stable are they? And when they're not stable, who's maintaining that and managing that? Those integration points and what's the timing of that and the cost associated with that. And then as I kind of mentioned there, as we see companies growing and expanding and globally into other regions, what kind of manual processes are tied to that? Our existing tool was set up to connect with our domestic banks, but as we advance, say, across the borders, we haven't maintained those connections with some of our new global banking partners. And because of that, we lack those insights on with our various banks there. So we're really only gaining, again, partial insights. And then lastly is the advancing needs. And this is where the poll ranked the highest, is oftentimes where we see clients kind of out in the market and looking at new technology is the advancing needs that we have. offering out capabilities that are not just in the Treasury world, but maybe expanding that to other areas of the organization, capital markets, risk management, working capital, and the supply chain side of things, where we would like to kind of use applications or tools that support various aspects and not maybe just the standard cash management functionality that tools historically have been able to do. And there's always that balancing act there where some of what we do is inside of this tool, and then other things we're doing are inside an Excel or in another tool. And at the end of the day, we really have to marry and merge all of this data together, which introduces operational inefficiencies and added risk there. I think these are all very common things that we hear. And then the other things to consider are the non-functional items. These are the things that aren't so much in the hands-on of the technology itself, but these really are things that relate to the application as a whole. So really, when we see it, the system support. Again, if we think about it from an internal, if something's built internally, do we have the expertise internally that know how that product was built and how to support that product? If we're using a third-party application, are we getting the support we need from that third party when we need it? How, can we call in and ask for help? What are the hours that we have there? Is it sufficient enough for us to get the assistance we need in order to use that tool? If it's a third-party application that's internally deployed, meaning it's an on-premise technology, again, you have that balance now of a vendor as well as internal IT and multiple arms of support that you might need in order to keep and maintain that application. And then a lot of times what you see, right, especially legacy technologies, that you need to migrate. They're sunsetting the tool. It's no longer going to be supported. It's no longer going to be supported from a functional perspective, meaning you can't call in and get help on it, but also you can't be supported from a security perspective. This happens to not only Treasury tools, but other tools as well. We think about like our internet browsers, right? We get messages that say we're only supporting versions 1, 2, and 3 now, or something along those lines, and the other ones, basically, you're at risk of security breaches. Is that something that you're considering or hearing, and why you might be looking at taking on this initiative? The next non-functional thing to consider is the reliance on that IT, as mentioned, is what's the spend that we have for our IT team to manage the various bank connection points that we have, to be able to bring our bank data in, to be able to push our bank data out. What does it take and the cost associated with it to set that up and maintain that? As well as the internal integration points, our integration with our ERP systems or other tools that we're using. How much reliance do we have on IT to set those things up and keep those things running? And again, what's the cost of that, and what's the opportunity cost of those things? And then the other thing to consider is the future proofing. Is the technology stale in that it's not evolving with the market? Maybe not even necessarily evolving with what we need today, but where we might need things in the future. Is the vendor keeping up with the market demands and maybe even getting ahead of those market demands? And are they providing thought leadership and looking into provide solutions that expand or go beyond potentially what you might need today? So kind of understanding those two things, again, the functional and non-functional considerations, I think there's various things here that all of us in the audience here would basically relate to. And with that, what we'll do is we'll transition now back over to Alicia, who will go through and talk through justifying the switch and getting that internal approval that might be needed.
Thanks, Tom, for kicking us off with those deciding factors. You covered some really great points to consider in the decision. So once you've decided that to move forward with a replacement, the next natural step is to obtain the approval to implement it. The way to achieve this is to build a business case. But before you begin, here are some key activities to prepare for it. First, you need to determine the key drivers and events underlying the need. There may be numerous drivers in your search, but I recommend determining the key ones to base your business case on. The second is understanding your executive management's perspective and goals. Is it efficiency gains and/or cost reduction, or perhaps enhancing capabilities to execute on your company's strategy? Or perhaps it's more about strengthening controls, managing risk, and/or achieving compliance. Again, there may be several goals here, so don't stop after uncovering just one. It's critical that you really understand your target audience and their goals to get aligned with them. Next, spend some time envisioning the roles and capabilities the Treasury Department could deliver with these enhanced tools. Common goal I've seen for Treasury is to transform from an operational to an analytical-driven function. Also go beyond the Treasury team. Make sure to engage with other teams to identify opportunities for cross-functional enhancements and start early with building support within those business areas. Lastly, get educated on the budget process. Perhaps it's your first time, even if you've been through the process before, there may be changes you need to get updated on. No matter the case, there are certainly critical dates you will need to be aware of to incorporate in your plan. Next slide, please, Tom. Now that you've done your homework, let's talk through what's involved in a business case project. This roadmap lays out the 4 phases, starting with project initiation. So here you will need to confirm the key stakeholders and get their level of commitment to ensure their engagement throughout the process. Next, draft a high-level plan, including key dates and task owners. Also, in this phase, you can draft a questionnaire that you can distribute to begin gathering the information and data you'll need for your business case. Which brings us to the next phase, which is completing a thorough assessment of the current state. So here you can arrange for interviewing key team members to gather information on the current state. And be sure to capture both qualitative and quantitative pieces of information. Qualitative information, such as current gaps and deficiencies, can help you frame the situation for your decision makers, while quantitative data, such as time spent on tasks, will back up the narrative you're building of your current state. You can also conduct process reviews to ensure any key current processes are documented. You should also be assessing the use and cost of your current technology applications. Also define existing business and technology architecture and identify internal technology standards. You can also research the landscape of Treasury technology and obtain an understanding of the vendor solutions out there. Identify and prioritize enhancement opportunities. While you won't have enough information or the resources to fully design the future state just yet, you should be able to determine some of the key enhancements that can be achieved with new technology. So now we get to developing the actual business case. So first you want to confirm the assessment results. There's a lot of data and information you've gathered, so let's be sure that it's all accurate and comprehensive. Draft the business case and be sure to clearly state your primary objectives, and again, incorporate the quantitative and qualitative factors to build a comprehensive picture for your audience. Review and revise the business case with your key stakeholders, because you will be relying on them to then obtain feedback from their respective management. And then finally, you can perform the final revision to finalize your business case. And now we are finally ready to present to management. Once you've presented to senior management, there will most likely be follow-ups required to obtain approval and incorporate your project into the budget cycle. Next slide, please, Tom. So how exactly do you calculate a return on investment for a technology project? In its simplest form, it is the difference between the savings and costs. So when measuring savings, be sure to capture various factors, such as identifying the potential cost reductions, such as bank fees, funding costs, or elimination of existing technology. Perform a bottom-up analysis of the time savings and do this by functional area. And also do not overlook any opportunities. This could be, for instance, the ability to scale your business without increasing headcount. Another potential opportunity for Treasury technology is the ability to generate additional revenue through enhanced asset allocation. These are all savings that should be factored in. Quantifying costs will be a little bit more straightforward, but it does require working with external parties. So on the software licensing side, your vendor can certainly provide this. Implementation and consulting services is something that your vendor and or consulting firms can provide. There are also costs associated with setting up your bank connectivity, and these are charges that your relationship manager or your bank can share with you. So in terms of presenting this data, once you've analyzed it, is a 4 to 5 year timeline, which is generally sufficient to show the element of ongoing costs. Be sure to depict the best and worst case scenarios to show the range of possible outcomes. Make sure you highlight the timeline to achieve a positive ROI under both scenarios. And clearly list all assumptions, because there will certainly be assumptions you take into account here. Next slide, please, Tom. So for those that are new to business cases and looking for something more tangible, here are a few sample deliverables I wanted to share with you. So first, in the top left corner is a graph which depicts the time savings for various tasks between the current state and future state. A bar graph is a highly effective visual for displaying any savings analysis you've performed. Over to the right is a process flow diagram with swim lanes to clearly depict the responsibilities that are owned by each team or department. This is useful when conveying to the audience the various points of handoff or communication, which could also indicate potential inefficiencies and redundancies. The chart in the top right corner is the ROI analysis. I don't expect you to be able to read the numbers here, but you should be able to see that the best case and worst case scenarios have been presented side by side, so you can do an easy comparison on the two scenarios. Also note the highlighted amounts to call out the timeline to achieve the positive ROI under both scenarios. In this case, in the best case scenario, this happens in the 3rd year, while the worst case scenario requires another year or so to reach that point. And then in the bottom left corner is a visual of a slide that sets the frame for the current state challenges. And this is something that you would generally include earlier in the business case presentation. So that wraps us up on this topic. So now that you've obtained the approval, pat yourselves on the back for a job well done. But we do need to get ready for the real work, because that's about to begin, getting the new solution implemented. So there are 5 major phases in the implementation. During the discovery stage, we'll be setting the foundation for the implementation. So it's critical that we have all key stakeholders engaged and team members that are dedicated to the project. Most of these activities are around requirements gathering, system design, and project planning. All very critical items. Next, we move into the configuration stage, which is really the execution state of the project. Based on the blueprint design, the system will be configured, and you should have checkpoints along the way to ensure that the configurations are in line with your expectations. Next, we have the delivery phase. So this is where we perform the knowledge transfer with user training sessions, which will empower users to then conduct testing of the system. The go-live stage is where we have the final preparations for deployment and transition to Kyriba support 2 weeks after go-live. And then the final stage is once you're live on the system and you have the ongoing support. At the bottom are the project management tools we'll be using throughout the duration of the project. My suggestion here is not to underestimate these. It is critical to have a disciplined approach to project management to ensure a successful implementation. So let's move on to looking at the milestones in an implementation. Next slide, please, Tom. So while the implementation methodology itself doesn't change when there is a legacy system in place, there are specific milestones you should identify and include when planning the project. Since high-level sponsors and key stakeholders tend to track the progress of a project based on milestones, be sure to plan these carefully. So here are some key milestones. In our case of replacing a legacy system, a recommended milestone in the delivery phase At the bottom is decommissioning your legacy system. Related to this milestone will be a set of change management related tasks that should be incorporated in your project plan. So I believe we're ready for our next poll. Is that right, Sarah?
That is exactly right. Thank you so much, Alicia. So this is time for our second poll, our second live poll. Today's question is, what is the biggest challenge that you encountered during the implementation of your current TMS? Go ahead and let us know on the screen. This is a live poll. We're taking your answers now. Click on the screen and let us know what was the biggest challenge that you encountered during the implementation of your current TMS. Let us know, was it the lack of resources, the system was just simply not a good fit, the project went over budget, or the project was delivered late? What is it that was the biggest challenge you encountered during the implementation of your current TMS? This is a live poll. We're taking your responses. I see them coming in as we speak. About 60% of you have submitted your response. I'm going to leave it open for just a few more seconds. Get your vote in now, and let's go ahead and close the poll and take a look at these results. Wow, okay. Looks like the biggest challenge that the majority, 58% of you, in fact, encountered was the lack of resources in your current TMS implementation. Tied for second place was, at 17%, the system was not a good fit or the project was delivered late. And in last place, 8% of you, the biggest challenge that you encountered during the implementation of your current TMS was that the project went over budget. So with that, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Sarah. So again, just like with Tom, I am not surprised with the results of that poll. I do commonly see the lack of resources is the #1 project issue. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. So special considerations. Now that we've oriented ourselves to the implementation process, there are special considerations to take into account when there is a legacy system in place. So first, you will need to start planning early and identify critical dates. A good starting point is reviewing your existing contract to determine any critical dates. You can also reach out to your existing vendor in the case of a sunsetting product to confirm the timeline. Next, consider lessons learned from previous implementations and incorporate them into the new project. So in the case of resourcing issues, again, this is a really common one I've seen. It's something that should be addressed with a detailed resource plan early in the project planning phase. There should also be alignment across the various stakeholders to ensure that resources are available for the project. In the case where a project was delivered late or went over budget, this is another common scenario I've seen, and this is where the diligence around project management can mitigate these risks. Lack of system knowledge internally, that's another one I've seen. So perhaps there's been some turnover over the years, as Tom mentioned earlier, or there was no proper transfer of knowledge at the time of deployment. Maybe you ran out of time or budget. Either issue can be avoided by ensuring there's sufficient time that's been set aside for user training and documentation. Post-implementation issues, I mean, there could be a lot of different types of issues here, but a lot of them do indicate either that some requirements were not fully captured or designed or defined or designed properly, or that the design was not executed correctly. Whatever the case may be, make sure to take some time to identify these lessons learned and proactively create a plan to address these. No one wants to repeat history. Next, we can also look to leverage existing documentation from your previous implementation. There's no need to recreate the wheel here. So requirements or use cases, even though the solution is changing, chances are there are some requirements that have not changed. So this is a good starting point when gathering your requirements. You can layer on any new ones or make updates as needed. Architecture diagrams, this is another common project artifact that you should be able to reuse. Just be sure to update for any post-implementation enhancements. Next are user guides or any standard operating procedural documents. These are usually quite detailed, and there's a lot of useful information in here that you should be able to use for your new project. So data migration. So just a quick point here that this may require working with your current TMS vendor to extract the data. Depending on the system, this may not be readily available to the end user. And since static data is one of the first items we work on in the new project, this is something that you'll want to address early on. Tom will also dive a little deeper on how to prepare this data for the new system. Last, we have parallel testing. So since you do have a legacy system in place, we need to ensure that the two systems are run concurrently as a way of testing and ensuring the new system is producing the same results for any functionality that's being replaced there. So Tom, I'll turn it over to you for the next topic.
Awesome. Thanks, Alicia. So now kind of as we have covered off why to do this and kind of the steps that need to get taken to achieve and kind of go out and procure a new solution, now it's kind of into that implementation and some things to consider in how to actually go about and approach that transition. Just at a very high level, individuals on this call that are using a technology today and looking to kind of take on something new or look at different possibilities that are out there in a bit of a unique situation as opposed to a first-time buyer. You can learn from our experiences, the goods and the bads of that, as Alicia has kind of pointed out, and carry that forward to a new implementation. So to continue on with what Alicia was talking about, as she alluded to, one of the things you have is you have existing technology today. If you don't, first-time buyers, they usually have data that's sporadically living in a lot of different places. ERPs, spreadsheets, bank statements, and so on. And when they're implementing their system, they got to bring all of that together and work with the consulting team to actually put that in place into the new technology. Well, when you're using an existing system today, a lot of that has been centralized, and so it exists there. And as Alicia mentioned, you work with that vendor to try to get that data and pull that data down. And one of the things we always recommend that no matter if you're 2 months away from doing an evaluation, 2 weeks away from doing an evaluation, or if you're a year away from doing an evaluation, start working on that and building that and getting access to that data. It'll make the transition more fluid as then we go into and actually start doing the build out. It's at this time that you're at a unique situation that you also can kind of, with that data, you have the opportunity to clean that data and normalize that data. The old saying, garbage in, garbage out. Well, if you have garbage data today, why bring that garbage data through to a new technology? So this is an opportunity to scrub that and to normalize that data. And what do we mean by normalize? It's just simply making it uniform. As companies go through acquisitions and divestitures, data kind of, and the standards of that data sometimes deviate and they change. This is a way that we can make our various entity structures uniform, our bank account nomenclature uniform, the way we do our reporting more uniform. So this is that opportunity to do that, rather than just take everything in the way it is today and then have to go and clean that up later. Reporting, as mentioned, it's important at this point to kind of understand what do we have today and what's working that needs to be replicated. Those mission critical items that we want to make sure we keep on a new tool. But what is it that we're doing outside that maybe a new solution could help with? What are we doing in Excel or other tools? What are we pulling together from one system to another to kind of achieve those daily, monthly, quarterly type reports? Is that something that we can look to do and make more efficient by doing in the new solution? Same thing on the processes side. There's key processes, mission critical things that you're doing in your existing technology that can't go away, and we have to ensure that those things get ported over and are done in the same effectiveness, if not more so, on the new solution. But again, what are the things that are done outside of the solution that we might look to emulate? One of the things there, just as an example, is having existing Treasury technology gives usually a Treasury team the capabilities to gather bank information and quickly consolidate and hopefully get to a consolidated group cash report level more quickly than without a solution. However, one of the processes that might exist outside of that would just be simple things as it relates to managing our actual bank accounts and our bank signers. Is that something that a Treasury solution could help with? Is that something that we could put a process in place inside of that same tool to achieve the efficiencies there? These are the types of things to get an understanding on and an opportunity to do that, to see what could be achieved inside of a new solution. So going on top of what Alicia's kind of flow diagram is there, right, and how we break down the evolution of an implementation, really we talk about the discovery, the build, the validation, and the delivery as we see here. I've also added the other preceding kind of a stage, which is the evaluation stage, which is the stage that everybody on this call is currently in, which is where we're kind of evaluating what's out there. Is this something we're going to do? Is this something we need to do? Or is this something we absolutely have to do? That's where we're at now, and understanding how to go about doing that. And then into the actual build out and actual deployment of a new technology. So I break this into two sections. And if we start over to the far left side of that, in the evaluation of the discovery phase, one of the things that we wanted to share were just some simple things to consider of the do's and don'ts. Again, it's an opportunity where some of these don'ts we might have experienced in the past when we did the last time we did this implementation. We can learn from that and change that in, say, this new project. So things to consider now as a part of your evaluation, as well as a part of your discovery, is in making sure that you're engaging all the parties that might be impacted or need to be involved with a new solution. That means don't forget to include internal audit, IT, security. Don't get too far down the path without having to stop the process and go back through it because we didn't properly engage, say, security, who might need to make sure that this new tool meets certain security standards that our company has. Those security standards always evolve at companies. Is the new technology compliant with that? We don't want to go too far down a route and get, through the evaluation and invest all that time and money into that stage and then find out that the tool doesn't meet our internal security restrictions. Additionally, make sure that you evaluate the consulting team's methodology. What's their strategy to the implementation and the success that they've had? Don't just look at the technology and the bells and whistles to compare to the existing bells and whistles that you have today, but also learn how is this going to get implemented, who's implementing it, and how have they done it in the past to make sure that this go round, it's successful for us. Do look inside of your network and consult your network about what they're using and how they've gone about this process and what they did as part of this evaluation and discovery process. But don't just look at a single company. Don't just take one of your references word. I mean, it's important to go and expand that. Don't just look at, say, a peer company or a competing company and see what they did. Look outside and see other companies and seek their input and what they've done. Look at your local AFP chapters, but broaden that perhaps outside of that network to understand, what they've done in this type of process before. Make sure that you're focusing on the areas that need to be addressed by this solution, and don't overlook the trivial areas. And what we mean by this is there's that 80-20, right, principle to everything. Don't just focus on the 20% and then perhaps miss the 80%, meaning we don't want to take on a new solution to address the 20% that we didn't have before, and now we only have a solution that addresses 20%. Now we miss the other 80%, the good stuff that we had before. Look at everything, but don't overlook some of those trivial things that you just take for granted, perhaps. Make sure that those do exist and can be accomplished inside of a new technology. And then also with that consulting team in this phase as well as the latter, seek the consulting team, the implementation team's best practice. Look for them to guide you and look for their input and ideas in terms of what can be done differently perhaps, or what they've experienced, they're seeing other companies do in this type of a process. Don't just necessarily take over what you've done before. From there, once we've kind of done the evaluation and understand, okay, here's the route that we're going to go and how we're going to go about it, and then into the discovery to say, here's what we need to do and how we need to do it, we then move into that kind of building phase where we're actually doing all of the implementation work itself, where we're doing all of that setup, and then we're doing all of the validation to make sure that setup meets our standards, and then actually going through and delivering that, and effectively at that point using that solution on a go-forward basis, and then moving off of our old technology. It's a couple of do's and don'ts there. Do get your hands dirty. This is an important time to train and learn the use of the new system. And don't just allow consultants, or really not only just consultants, but just single individuals inside of your own group to do 100% of the work. if you're going to be using the solution in some capacity, it's important to do some of the implementation work, as that serves as some training. So it's important to not just be delivered a solution, and oftentimes in situations where we're talking with companies that are moving off a solution, they've had this experience where they say, well, we didn't really do the build, somebody else did it for us. And they're lacking the knowledge that they need in order to grow the use of the system. They were simply just given something and they don't really know how it was all maybe structured and set up in the back end. Additionally, make sure that you're committing to regular check-ins with the consulting teams. This is something that Alicia was mentioning earlier and kind of helps alleviate to the poll result, potentially, that lack of resourcing. It's quite a common thing, and that was not a surprising poll metric to see that, we have lack of resources. Obviously, as we like to say, you have day jobs, and part of that, and that day job isn't building out and setting up a brand new data system, for instance, from scratch. So it's important to kind of leverage best practices from a project management perspective, both on your side as well as the consulting team side, and make sure that you're committing to these regular check-ins. Don't assume that work is being done. It's important to make sure you're hitting your milestones, where you're at in relation to those, and ensuring that you're hitting those target dates along the way. Sometimes implementations focus so much solely on getting the work done or actually doing all of the work, but you're missing the actual project management of that you need to kind of lay those things out and make sure that the milestones are in place. As mentioned, to do here is to evaluate those best practices, as mentioned in the last step. This is an opportunity that you can look to your consulting teams to help you recommend some best practice. And don't commit to just keeping everything as status quo. If it didn't work the right way in the old system, why bring that forward into the new system? If it was working inefficiently in the old system, why bring that forward to a new system? Use this as an opportunity to change that. Do test and retest your regular functionalities that you need. They're critical to your current processes, meaning that we want to make sure that those key mission critical things are being evaluated. Don't take those for granted that they will just work. Make sure that you're validating that. And then also make sure during that time that you're including non-regular functions. And what we mean by that is that also consider things that are period end, not daily activities, but also what are we doing at month end, quarter end, and year end. If we overlook those in the validation stage, we could go ahead and might deliver something that at the end of that period, we would say, oh, we didn't actually validate this. It might not work the way we need it to in this new solution. So also keep that in mind as well. And then lastly, don't allow training to be optional. This is the key time that training is where you can take your time and actually use this time to learn the solution and learn how you're going to use it on an ongoing basis. Trying to do that retroactively is rushed. And as you know, if you're after a go live, the system's live now. The company's requiring that you use this. It's needed. It's a needed tool, and so the attention to that training is not going to be as efficient as it would be had you have done this, during these stages here, especially during that validation phase. So with that, what we'll do is, with the remaining 10, 15 minutes or so, pass it over and see if there has been any questions that have come in. Sarah, I'll pass it back over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you both. We do. Thank you to our audience members who have submitted questions. And for those of you who haven't yet submitted a question, take a look on your control panel, locate the questions section of it, and go ahead and submit your question. Our presenters today will be responding to just as many questions and answers as we can get to in the next about 15 minutes. We've got a couple already. Let's go ahead and get started with those. Let's go to Alicia with our very first one. Alicia, this person wants to know, what is your recommendation for the length of parallel testing between the new system and the legacy system? Again, the question is, what's your recommendation for the length of parallel testing between the new system and the legacy system?
Thanks, Sarah. So generally I recommend a month. If this isn't possible, I would say be sure to include a month end at a minimum to capture the month end activities. I've seen longer parallel periods of a quarter, for instance, where this is typical for maybe a larger implementation, and with clients that also tend to be more conservative in their approach. So the more time you can give, the better, I would say, but at a minimum, the 1 month parallel testing really is a critical step, and it gives you an opportunity to find those issues that may not have been identified during user testing. So be sure to invest some time here.
Great. Thanks, Alicia. Next question. Tom, we're going to toss it over to you. This person wants to know, we only have some of our companies currently working on our TMS. What suggestions do you have to support this transition to a global TMS rollout? Tom?
And yeah, that's a good question. That's something we commonly see. It might go back to one of the original poll questions where companies expanded, geographically. That might have happened through acquisition, perhaps, or just through organic growth, mainly usually through acquisition. So now you have a technology in-house where only some of our companies are using it, meaning only some of our data is seen, and we're not getting that global visibility. Now is an opportunity where you're kind of looking and evaluating new solutions to make sure that you're gaining that 100% visibility. So it's important to not just consider keeping what you have, not just taking those entities and business units that are in the existing technology and starting there. For instance, we'll sometimes hear that, well, let's just start with what we have and move them over. You'll probably end up in the same state you're in now. You'll want to, in this transitionary period, consider all companies and all the things needed for that in this initial implementation of a new project, meaning just don't try to keep that status quo, as I was saying before. This is the opportunity to do that. Additionally, something to think about as well is, depending upon your company and kind of the strategies that your company might have, is what if things change again? What if we continue, or a company who's continuing to acquire and go into other regions? Is the technology that we're using going to keep up with that? Or again, are we going to get stuck to a point where we'll only be as good as the day we've implemented that system? That's a part, and something they also consider as you're in the evaluation stage to make sure that a solution provider that we take on perhaps can kind of go into the other regions we're looking to expand to geographically.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. Alicia, back to you. Next question from our audience. And again, we see all your questions coming in. Keep them coming. We've got just over 10 minutes to cover them. So even if we don't get to answer your question live on the broadcast today, we will be certain to follow up and answer your question through email. That's if we don't get to it today. Next question, again for Alicia, is how long should I plan to prepare a solid business case?
Great question. So typically, I would recommend 2 to 3 months from start to finish. There's some lead time required to recruit the folks required and to get organized. So I covered these earlier in the presentation under the preparation activities. So the actual time to create the business case could probably be condensed down to a few weeks if required. But really make sure you give yourself sufficient time to gather the information and data to build a solid business case. Chances are, if you don't get approved, then you'll have to wait until the next budget cycle, which really means that in the meantime, you're having to live with a current system or technology that's really underserving you. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, very good. And so next question is, we're going to go back to you, Tom. Realistically, considering the implementation timeline for a new solution, when should I start looking at a possible replacement technology?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's always important to keep an ear out, right, and an eye out in the market, right? It's an opportunity, with the way technologies are used today and deployed today in the cloud, it makes, frankly, it makes your ability to move much easier than that need of the old days of buying a solution and buying all the hardware and bringing all that in. So what I'm saying is basically, I think it's always, you always have the opportunity to kind of be shopping a bit, right, or kind of keeping an eye out of what's in the market. That said, you never want to be in a situation where you're pressed up against the clock, and that does happen. We see that sometimes where clients are only a couple months away and they're saying, well, our current technology is going to get sunset, or we've been mandated that we need to be off of this for a security reason, and now you're up against the clock. And sometimes you lack the ability then to do maybe what you want to do as you're frantically trying to evolve this solution. I think it's important to kind of understand first, is there a time frame that we need to hit? Are we just kind of understanding what's out there now, or is we up for a renewal? Are we mandated based on are we given a mandate that we need to be off by a given date? Is there a solution end date, sunsetting date that we've been given from the vendor, and what is that? What I would say and what I would typically see is, especially because the evaluation discovery takes some time, you want to take your time going through those things. You should be, I would say no less than 6 months out from that. That would be absolutely, in my opinion, probably a drop, the kind of the last time to go through that.
Understood. Thank you, Tom. Next question. This one's going to be for Alicia. Alicia, what tools do you suggest using for the data extract or data conversion task of the legacy data, and also configuration data? I'll read it again one more time. What tools do you suggest using for the data extract or the data conversion task of the legacy data and also the configuration data?
So I'll have to say the answer here really is probably everyone's favorite tool, which is Excel. Depending on the amount of data and the transformation that's required, covering those items that Tom talked about earlier with your data normalization, I would say Excel. You have the ability to use formulas to clean up the data and build those normalization. You also can build in macros if you want to get a little more sophisticated as required by the data. So Sarah, was the second piece of the question more around configuration data?
Just related to whether or not we would also use the same tool for configuration data.
So that really depends on the system you're implementing. Most systems I've seen do generally require a format that can be transformed from Excel. So if it's a flat file, for instance, that's comma delimited, you can start with Excel and then just transform it to that required format. But I'd say the short answer in this case is really using Excel.
Very good. Denise, thanks for the answer. Next question, or excuse me, Denise, thanks for the question. Next question from our audience, and again, thank you for submitting them. Go ahead and please continue to submit. Next question comes from a tool, and a tool wants to know, Tom, we'll toss this one your way. A tool is interested to know configuration is done by Kyriba or by company staff.
A good question there. So I'll answer it this way. So the company staff is not solely required or to do the implementation itself. It's not like you're taking on a solution, let's say Kyriba. I can only speak on behalf of Kyriba, obviously. So let's then say you take on Kyriba and you're 100% needed to do that implementation yourself. That doesn't make any sense. As mentioned, kind of one of the best practices, we would encourage you to be a part of some of the implementation because that offers as some training there. Kyriba, and so Kyriba is a unique company because we can do that implementation or work with you in that implementation, but we also have a broad network of consultants, Actualize being one, that also work and do implementations of our application with you. I have never seen somebody take on the implementation themselves solely without the Kyriba involvement or say a consultant's involvement to do that implementation. That's obviously a recommended best practice in order to get the system up and running the way you need it to be run.
Very good. Thank you for the question. Next question from our audience is from Bill. And this one we'll stick with you, Tom, and see if you can give us an answer for Bill. Bill wants to know, he's looking to start a totally new system. How long for it to be completed?
I'll start, and Alicia, you can chime in. It's a very tough question to answer. There's a number of variables that go into that, and it's something that everybody asks, right? Every conversation I have is, that system looks awesome. How long till I can get it, right? And the variables you have to consider, I find, are a couple of things. Is what's the scope of the technology that we need? A client who's implementing, and I'm going to say just focusing on Kyriba again, but a client who needs our application to do cash management, cash forecasting, payments, for instance. Let's say that those three areas, and maybe accounting. The implementation of that company to the company that's exactly the same size, but then needs, say, risk management, needs hedge accounting, and so on. Those are two different timelines, right? Because they have two different, scopes that they need to consider there. So it's obviously, what is it that you need the solution to do? And the other thing, the other variable that's key to this is the number of banks that you need to integrate with. And that's, again, something unique for Kyriba. Kyriba uniquely does and offers connectivity with our solution. How long is it going to take for us to set up the bank connections with all of these different banks? Somebody who's working with, say, 2 major domestic banks is going to take a shorter amount of time than somebody then, and we have clients that are running hundreds of banks. That's just a natural thing. We have to test all of those different connections as a part of that implementation. I've seen our product get implemented in as short as 8 weeks, and I've seen it go longer than that over a number of months, based on those factors of what's in scope, and also the considering where are all the banks that we're working with there. Lastly, the other thing to consider as well is who's involved in the implementation as well. Is Treasury centralized and a few people expected to use the tool here, or do we have decentralized kind of process? And we'll see clients that have hundreds. We have clients that have thousands of users in our application, and with that deployment, that requires kind of maybe a regional training that needs to be considered, which obviously then adds to that overall timeline. I will just say that the biggest duration of a project, meaning the time it takes, is usually on the connectivity side. And that's why you have to consider, well, how many banks do we have? How many banks do we make payments through? From a Kyriba perspective, that's usually the longest duration. And it's not because of Kyriba, it's because of the banks, and we have to wait for the banks and work with the banks on your behalf to get implemented with them, and really we have to work usually on their schedule. But that's usually one of the critical path items.
Very good. Alicia, anything to add to that?
Tom, I thought that was a really great answer. Those are all really important, I guess, factors to incorporate in determining that timeline. I guess the only thing I will add is really the resources. So I know you touched on this a little bit on the latter part of your answer, but typically when you start with an implementation, there's a project plan that's put together by the project manager. It could be in conjunction with the client project manager and the consulting project manager or vendor project manager. So when a client team receives this timeline, there's a review and sign off that's required. And I typically don't see much revisions being made from a timeline perspective. What would be nice to see is for a team to get back and say, look, this just requires too much time commitment from our team, and we just don't have that. Maybe this quarter is a little tough, so then we have to extend the timeline. So that's something to really incorporate into creating this project timeline. Really being realistic on the level of commitment you can expect from your internal resources.
Thanks, Alicia. And we're going to stick with you for just another moment. Another question come in here. The question is that you mentioned one of the special considerations is identifying critical dates. Could you give some examples of what critical dates or critical milestones might be?
Sure. So Tom actually touched on this earlier when answering the question about how early to start this process. So the critical dates in your existing contract, maybe you're up for renewal. So if you have a renewal deadline later this year, then you should be aware of that, so that you don't have to pay for another full year of the current system if you plan on decommissioning it. Another critical date is the sunsetting scenario. If there's a product that's going away, then you certainly want to make sure you have a new one in place, and early enough in place that you can do that parallel testing that we've discussed earlier. Those are some key critical dates. So that's for the implementation itself, and then on the business case development project, those critical dates would again be driven by that, because you need to back into how early you need to start your business case development, but you should also take into account any budget cycle dates.
Excellent. Very good. Okay, last question as we are just about to the top of the hour. This one, we're going to take it back to Tom. Tom, this person wants to know what security mechanisms are used to connect with banks. Is it SFTP over internet or private encrypted channel /VPN to connect with banks? And what is the usual adopted practice across Kyriba implementations at this point?
Ooh, that's an educated buyer there. That's a good question. That's Yeah, Kyriba has, and speaking on behalf of Kyriba, has a number of different ways of integrating with banks, a number of different methodologies that we use to connect with banks. So SFTP is one way, and we would commonly see that used in the larger global or domestic banks. It's an easy, efficient, cost-effective way for our clients. But we also have other ways in which we do that, such as methods that we'll use through SWIFT. There's a number of different ways we can do that. We're a SWIFT member ourselves, Kyriba. We're a banking member to the SWIFT network. That gives us concentrator capabilities in that way. And then you also have to think about the future. When you look at being able to connect with the banks, as the banks evolve, and they are evolving, we can evolve with them. So now banks are, through PSD2 and open banking, pushing out of Europe has allowed, push the banks to kind of, open up from an API perspective. And Kyriba now integrates with one bank through API with more coming. And it's just naturally that the dominoes kind of fall. Once one does that, then they'll very quickly, there'll be more adoption from more of the banks. So we'll be building that with them in that way. The other thing is that there's local networks as well that we work with. When you talk about, say, EBIX or Zengen in Japan, these are all things as well that we do on our side. Just the important part is that it's completely internally owned by Kyriba, such that we don't outsource that. We don't leverage third party for that, and that keeps us SOC compliant for our clients.
Very good. Well, it is the top of the hour, so we will have to leave it there. For those of you that have outstanding questions, we'll be sure to follow up through email in the next 3 to 5 business days to get those answered. And for everyone on the call today, keep an eye on your inbox for the recording of today's session and the link to the slides so that you can share them with your colleagues. If you are ready to learn more about bringing Kyriba to your organization, please email us at treasury@kyriba.com. Thank you very much to everyone for attending today's webinar, Keys to Successfully Migrating Off a Legacy TMS. I'd like to thank our speakers, Alicia Kennedy from Actualize Consulting and our very own Tom Gavigan. This is Sarah Pease from Marketing at Kyriba. Thanks again and enjoy your day.